Okay, we have been talking about the process of meiosis, which results in 4 genetically different cells from the parent cell after having 2 cycles of cell division. So one of the products of meiosis is sperm. And so when meiosis is used to create sperm, we call that process spermatogenesis. So you can see right here, the word sperm is in this word, and genesis means the beginning. So for those of you who are churchgoers, Genesis is the first book of the Bible, and it starts in the beginning. So Genesis means the beginning of. So if you see here in spermatogenesis, we have a cell that is created by mitosis, so therefore it must be a diploid cell. We know that because all mitosis does is create genetically identical cells, and we always start with the diploid cell. So we start with our diploid cell over here, and there is one cell division called meiosis 1, and then another cell division called meiosis 2, and we end up with 4 cells. And I don't know if you guys can see this on your picture or not, but these are actually supposed to be like 4 little sperm cells right here. Oh, and they should be all equally sized, although mine are not. So in the end here, you end up with 4 what we call viable sperm cells. The root of the word viable is like, I think it's it might be via or something like that. But anyway, it means live or living or alive. So 4 viable sperm are created by spermatogenesis. So note that this is meiosis, it just is creating sperm. When meiosis is used to create eggs, we call it oogenesis. And the presence of these 2 O's right here actually relates back to this word right here, oogonium, which essentially means egg. So egg genesis is the beginning of the egg. So for whatever reason, here is your diploid cell right here. I don't know why it starts on the right and goes to the left in this diagram. But you start with a diploid cell, and you get your first division, which is meiosis 1. And then your second division, which is your meiosis 2, and you end up with how many viable egg cells, as you can see in this picture? One viable egg cell, which is right here. 1 viable egg cell. And the other 3 cells that are created from this process are called polar bodies, which end up getting recycled back into the body or disintegrated, I guess, as the case may be. So I just want to point out to you again, these 2 processes are both meiosis, but depending on what they make, we give them a different name. So it's kind of like saying meiosis is the umbrella term, like colors, for example, and spermatogenesis might be the blues, and oogenesis might be the reds. Blues and reds are both colors. Okay. All right, so we are going to spend some time talking about reproductive systems. So the first thing I want to do is remind you about our sexual reproduction, our sexual harassment chat. So obviously there probably won't be too much of an issue here while we are discussing the anatomy of a flower, which is an organ of sexual reproduction. But coming up, we'll be focusing on the human reproductive systems, and so I just want you to kind of keep that in mind as we go through here. So flowers are organs of sexual reproduction. This is so important to know, because a lot of people think to themselves, if there's a question on your Regents exam about, say, name an organism that reproduces asexually, and they'll say a flower. No. Flowers are organs of sexual reproduction, just like a penis or a vagina. So an easy way for you to remember that flowers are organs of sexual reproduction is to do the chant. Flower, penis, vagina. Flower, penis, vagina. So let's hear it. All right, you can think it in your head, even if you don't want to. All right, here's what I want you to do. In your head, 7 times I want you to think. Flower, penis, vagina. 7 times. Go. Okay, so now once you've repeated it 7 times in your head, it's now in your short-term memory. So for the rest of the day and through all of the day tomorrow, every time you hear the bell ring, I want you to think that in your head, flower, penis, vagina. And you will never, ever tell me that a flower, you will never, ever, ever forget that a flower is an organ of sexual reproduction. This is important. All right, so once upon a time, like probably way back in 3rd grade or something like that, you guys studied the anatomy of a flower. So you should be able to tell me some of these parts. The petal. This right here is a petal, spelled P-E-T-A-L, not spelled P-E-D-A-L. P-E-D-A-L, petal, that's what you make your bike go with. Yeah. Stem. Good, we've got a stem down here. And this, by the way, is also a petal. I don't know why it's labeled on here twice, but it just is. We do not call any of these parts leaves. A leaf would be the part, if the stem continued down here and then there was like a leaf that came off, that would be the leaf. But we don't have any leaves in this. Pistil. The pistil is one of the name for all the female parts of the flower. That would be pistil, P-I-S-T-I-L, not P-I-S-T-O-L, the firearm. The other name for the female parts are also called, oh my goodness, I cannot speak. The female parts are also called the carpels. So the carpel and the pistil are synonyms for the female parts of a flower. Okay, so now we've identified that on the right-hand side, these are the female parts of the flower. What do you suppose that a circular structure within the female parts of the flower might be? An egg, because those are used for reproduction. Eggs are also sometimes called ova, ovum, in one singular ovum, or multiple ova. These mean the same thing. And where do you suppose the ova are produced or housed? We're talking about a flower. The ova, are produced in the ovary. So the flower has an ovary, and as a matter of fact, I really like to eat ripe ovaries, and I bet you do too. Because when a flower is pollinated and one of those eggs, or in some cases multiple eggs, get fertilized and grow into seeds, sometimes around them grows a nice protective layer. So this ovary actually grows into a protective layer that might have some kind of hard outer skin and then a fleshy or a meaty part just inside that with seeds in the center, like, oh, I don't know, an apple or an orange or a cucumber. Love my ovaries. So, moving on. All right, so eggs and ovaries, those are pretty easy, I guess, to recall or to think about your female parts. But there's also this part up here called the sticky stigma, which you may not remember from 17 years ago when you studied this. And the style. The style is the stalk. So basically, pollen will fall on the stigma here, and then it will go down the style until it gets to an egg and it will fertilize it. Actually, usually double fertilization takes place, but we're not going to focus too much on that. So if on the right-hand side we have all of the female parts, what do you suppose is over here on the left-hand side? The male parts. And when you have lots of males together, we call them men. Does that help you remember what the male parts are called? Stamen. The male parts are the stamen together. Excuse me. Okay, and the male parts include the anther on the top where the pollen grains are made. And the anthers are held up by the filaments. And this piece down here that looks like a leaf that we want to call a leaf is actually a very special type of leaf called a sepal. S-E-P-A-L. Yes, when the flower is budding, the sepal is they're the green colored leaves that you see on the outside. They're usually a little more sturdy than the typical leaves, but eventually they will open up and the flower, it will bud and turn into a beautiful flower. Okay, this flower has both male and female parts. Do you see that? Male parts, female parts. Therefore, we call it a perfect flower, because what could be more perfect than to be able to introduce genetic variety without having to go through the bother of finding a mate? Personally, I think that would be pretty awesome. So a perfect flower has both male and female parts. What do you think an imperfect flower is then? Correct. Imperfect flowers have either male or female parts, but they only have one or the other. So how many of you have ever grown pumpkins? Okay, have you ever looked very closely at the flowers? The next time you grow pumpkins, look very closely at the flowers. Pumpkins on a vine will have some male flowers and they will have some female flowers. And so it's necessary for those types of flowers to get the corresponding gamete from a different flower. So what do we call it when you've got a flower and it needs pollen from a different flower in order to... Pollination. Right, we call it pollination. So what kind of pollination, though, if it requires more than one flower? Cross-pollination. Ooh. Cross-pollination is when the sperm and the egg, not the sperm, just kidding, the pollen and the egg come from two separate flowers. So imagine that in this particular flower right here, the one that we're looking at, there's a little bee buzzing about, bzz, 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 and it hits right here. Okay, somewhere between the petal and the filament that holds up the anther. And it's, stacking the pollen in its legs and its pouches there, and it kind of bumps into one of the filaments, and the anther kind of tips over and hits the stigma. What do we call that? Flowers? Oh, sorry. So what kind of pollination would it be if this flower pollinated itself? Yeah, it would be self-pollination. Yeah, that's crazy how scientists come up with these weird words, huh? So self-pollination is when the sperm and the egg, I keep saying sperm, but what I really mean is the pollen and the egg that it fertilizes are from the same flower. Okay, now, plants are pretty extraordinary. So take, for example, a spider plant. A spider plant, you can cut a piece off, put it in water, it'll grow roots, and you've got a new plant. Right? That's one way a spider plant can make a new plant. Spider plants also send out runners to try to find better soil so they can start growing. That's a second way that a spider plant can reproduce. Spider plants also flower. And flowers are organs of sexual reproduction. So that would introduce genetic variety. Now think about it. How many plants have you ever seen that are like, I don't really like this location. I think it's time for me to reproduce. I'm going to get up and walk over to that, that other spider plant over there and see if they've got some pollen for me so I can, make some offspring. It doesn't happen. So it's a huge evolutionary advantage for a plant to be able to reproduce both sexually and asexually, because reproducing sexually helps it to survive any kind of traumatic or large-scale environmental change, but having the ability to reproduce asexually allows it to reproduce and get its genes spread even though it can't actually go out and find mates. So it's kind of like the best of both worlds. Any questions on the anatomy of a flower, the sexual reproductive system of a plant? Okay. Hello. I just told it I wanted to be done. Must be it didn't like me.
It's Monday.
What? I don't want to print. This is not what I want.